this is called Wendy's Personal Story and Perspective of Autism. So although some of you may know Wendy's story, there'll be people who don't, and so I thought it was important to share that, and also to talk a little bit about some of the research. I'll go into a lot more detail later about some of the exciting research that I'm involved in the University of Louisville. And during this morning's talk, if we get time, I want to play you just some of a short video clip. But if we don't get to play it, it's okay, because you can all look it up on YouTube if you're interested, and we'll talk more about it as this time unfolds. So Wendy talks about her personal journey, helps, hindrances, early and late childhood, teen years, school, getting married. I won't talk very much about that, especially that wasn't too bad, but the being married, that was awful. But we won't talk any more about that either. I have 2 sons on the spectrum. I had 4 kids. The middle lad had some learning issues. Katie, my daughter, is a teacher. She's married. We won't talk about that either. But I have 2 gorgeous little granddaughters. The youngest has a few issues. She reminds me a lot of myself when I was younger, which I'm excited about, but her parents are not. Some relational differences between those of us with autism as an autistic adult, that's me, people who are not on the autistic spectrum. Not everybody makes it in, do they? So there has to be people with autism, people without, and hopefully we can all learn to get along. Sensory environment, which is really important, and I'm happy to say they're now talking a little bit more about this because it's included in the DSM-5, the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that some of you will have heard about. It's only a small little bit in there, but it's there, so we hope that that'll grow. I'm putting it all together. I'd like to start by reading you this poem. This is something Mum used to say quite a bit when I was younger. She'd say, "That's typical, Wendy. That's typical." And I always used to think, what's typical? It's a very strange expression. "That's typical," I heard her say. I wondered what she meant. "You always want it your way," she echoed without relent. I waited, silent as a bird, and pondered on her words. She just kept talking. I kept walking. What was it that I heard? "That's typical. I always want it my way." What other way could there be? What other way could there be? I only know the proper way, the way that's there for me. If we do it her way, it wouldn't be right at all. It would be wrong, and all along I'd know it's wrong and not okay. That's typical, so why can't she understand? What is it she doesn't get? I must firmly stand my ground. I mustn't give in yet. If I give up, she'll never learn. She'll never know the way. She calls it being stubborn, but I'm scripted for this play. And don't we sometimes think of life as a stage? Go on, say yes, talk to me. Yes, life's a stage, and are we all sort of players or actors on life's stage? Yeah, so does that mean we each have a script? Yeah, but is it like rolled up in your back pocket? No, why not? No, we won't go into that. Everybody's got a script. We all interact with other people. We all relate to other people according to our scripts, our unwritten script. It's a script that enables us to know stuff, how to enter and leave a conversation appropriately, how to enter and leave what's it called, the place that sells newspapers? What's that called? News agent, without buying all the magazines on piston engines. Now, if you go in, they'll often have them all together in a pile. Now, what does that tell me? Well, that must be a set. Yeah, they're all stacked. That's a set. I have to buy the lot. And if somebody says, "No, Wendy, that's not a good idea, because if you spend all your money on exactly the same copy and you've got 50 of them, you won't have anything left for other things." I mean, do I care? Say no. No, I don't, because at that point in time, I am taken up with, I must buy the set. It would make so much more sense if they didn't put them in sets. If they actually had, the show one or the one you can buy, and then spread them around a bit in other places. At least it would give an indication They're not meant to be together. Now, you probably know whether you're looking at the paper or the magazine, you would know if they were all the same. And if they're all the same, they're possibly not a set. But you're accessing understanding and information very differently to Wendy and to those of us on the autistic spectrum who are actually connecting to understanding very differently because our brains are wired up differently. And I really hope by the end of the day you'll get this, because getting autism is really difficult. And instead of saying things like that's typical, okay, you'll say, oh, now I understand. She's not being typical as in the understanding of neurologically typical as in how we kind of judge people by looking at behaviour. You're going to say, oh, that's autism. And that makes a huge difference to how we relate. Okay, my family, my aunts were very accepting. Mum was one of 7. I had a lot of aunts. Mum found it very difficult having a child so distant, so different and untamable. Dad found me interesting. You know that autism's genetic, don't you? A bit like him, but was too busy to pay me much attention. Sisters found me confusing. My brother didn't notice me. My brother's on the autistic spectrum too. That was funny? All right then, it's okay. Laughing's good. Laughing keeps people awake. This is a photo of Wendy as a 4-year-old, standing in the darker colour coat next to my sister Ali, who's 3. Now Ali, as you can see, is pretty aware of Wendy. Can you notice that by looking at the picture? Yeah, I suppose you don't know what she's noticing, but I know because I remember this photograph. She's very aware of me. What am I aware of? Not her. I'm not aware of Ali. I am actually really anxious because I'm having to stand next to a very prickly coat that Ali is wearing. And that's what I remember about that photo. I wasn't talking at this age. I didn't talk till much closer to my 5th birthday. I was actually diagnosed with intellectual disability before my 2nd birthday. I'm not intellectually disabled, but it's easy to confuse these things because if someone isn't talking and is kind of off in their own world, people don't understand that actually you can be thinking, you can be available with your attention, but it mightn't be attending to what people or other people are noticing. And I'll talk more about this. I went to ordinary schools. I didn't go very often. Yes, I escaped frequently. I loved to freely run everywhere. I didn't understand about differences in playgrounds. I was often in trouble. Totally unaware of other people, not connected to the world going on within me or around me. So I didn't notice the state of my bladder. I didn't know if I was hungry. I didn't know if I was warm or cold. Those sorts of things. What I did know were things that interested me. If something interested me, a shiny leaf, a twirly bit of string, that the right angles on tables, I'd get on the floor and notice the right angle of a desk. Don't you find that interesting? How come you don't notice right angles of desks? I find this fascinating. It's because your brain is wired up to notice lots of things, isn't it? Go on, just say yes. Yeah, it notices lots of things because you're wired up quite differently to me. And we'll talk more about this. I've got to make sure I stay in time. You remember this scene from a film called Rain Man? Yeah? These are both actors. The guy in the darker coloured coat is acting the role of somebody who we'd think of as neurologically typical NT, part of the generic population. I've got to be very careful here. The guy in the whiter or lighter coloured coat is acting the role in the film of somebody with classic autism. I look at these two and I'm not sure which one I'm more worried about. Don't you agree Tom's a worry? Yes. Wouldn't we like to fix him? Yes. Anyway. Wendy has an outgoing personality. I got all I wanted by just taking Mum and leading her by the hand, pointing stuff out. It worked really well. As a kid, I was very independent, possessed a very real passion for life. I'm the same as a grown-up. Do you know about personality? People have personalities? Yeah, everybody's so different. And sometimes personality isn't really accounted for in the world of autism, and it needs to be, because it makes such a huge difference to how a kid is, and teenagers and adults. I wasn't shy. I frequently went off with strangers. My youngest son has Asperger-type autism, high-functioning autism, they're calling it these days. In a train home from Melbourne to Warrnambool, where I live, a 3 hours, 10 minutes trip, he'd be in the compartment of the train telling everybody his whole life story. He just doesn't, he talks to everybody, go off with anybody, trust anybody. Is this a good thing? Not really, because what is he not discerning? Whether somebody's trustworthy or no, whether somebody wants to know or no, he's not noticing those sorts of things. Open personality style has lots of assets, but on the other hand, it has issues. My personality made me vulnerable. Lively, outgoing, independent, keen to learn, absolutely. Keen to learn by exploring my insects, taking the backs off of the snails' backs, taking their homes off. You know what I mean? See if it would free them up and make them move quicker. It doesn't, so don't bother. At the same time, very gullible, very vulnerable, go off with anyone, totally unaware of danger. I didn't relate to people very easily, as in any kind of mutuality. No, I talked to everybody, but that was a bit different. If the postman arrived, I might go up and start talking about my beetles or my insects to him, and got me into all sorts of trouble. Very attached to animals. And this seems to be more common for girls on the spectrum. Have you noticed? People might have noticed this. It's very interesting. And some girls and women may end up working or being very attached to horses, for example, which is seen as very usual. It's not uncommon. But the way that we relate, there's usually a bit of a passionate quality. Sometimes people know that as obsessive. Have you heard of that one? Yeah, we want to ditch that word. We don't want obsessive or obsession, we want passion. Because passion denotes what? Say love.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very important to you. What does obsession kind of make you think about? Has it kind of got a bad flavour to it? Yeah, and if people think you're a bit obsessive, what do? They take the obsession away, which is a totally wrong thing to do in the world of autism. Now, there are obsessions which are inappropriate. There are obsessions which people find quite hard to use. There are obsessions that people don't realise are passions, and they think, oh, he's spent too much time on that, she's spent too much time on that. They try and take it away. What they're failing to recognise is that you need to use that passion to take me where you want me to go, because that's where my head lives. Now, passion is where I live, so that's where I'm attending. And that's really important to understand. I talked about insects, how I used to line them up, take notes on how they moved, their speed and direction and so on. I was quite excited when I went, where did I go? There's a place called a Channel Island, Jersey, Guernsey, something like that. I can't remember which one, but when I got off the ferry, yeah, there was this huge, I walked in a bit, it wasn't exactly when I got off, I walked in a bit and there was a museum and there was this huge statue and a very famous person, and he was famous for collecting insects. I was really excited. Because I thought, wow, see, they've got their priorities right in that island. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, by the age of 9, I was sexually abused, and that sexual abuse went on for some time. And this worries me, because I think possibly kids on the spectrum are more likely to be abused, because we're so literal. If an adult says you should do, we do, quite often. So it's a bit of a scary thing. I've actually written a couple of kids' books that address this for kids to read. Anyway, you can check that out. School rules didn't make sense to me. How often do school rules change? All the time. They're changing all the time. Do you have rules for summer and rules for winter and wet weather rules? And it's very hard to understand. If it's a rule in my head, that means it should be sort of, it should stay the same. So it's hard to understand about, have you heard of bending rules? That brings all sorts of images up in my head. It's very odd. So I was often in trouble. Lots of ear infections. I actually think possibly ear infections and painful legs. They talk about growing pains. I actually think it's possibly more common, not just in fair-haired, fair-skinned young people, but in the world of autism. And autoimmune stuff, I think is quite interesting. Anyway, so if a kid complains of their legs hurting, we need to listen. I like what that gentleman said at the beginning about listening. Please listen. We mightn't just be moaning about not wanting to walk. It might actually be that we're in pain. At home, scared of sudden noise, machines, airplanes. This was really interesting because I was scared of them but fascinated by them. So I'd be really drawn, especially to the vacuum cleaner. And in my first grandchild, she used to spend hours with the vacuum cleaner. It was very exciting. Very drawn, but at the same time scared. And you will see this dichotomy. You will see this kind of opposition in young people. Didn't play with siblings. Didn't really notice them unless they weren't there. Then that was odd because they were meant to be. Did my own thing. Loved to ride my bike for miles. Often visited a local traveller site. I was born in the UK, in Colchester in Essex, and I spent the first few years mostly in the West Country. I was in Essex for a little while, just till I was just a toddler, and then we moved to the West. Can you hear my accent? I have a lovely West Country accent. Have you noticed? Wait a minute, I'll prove it to you. What, my lover? See, it's there. Anyway, local travellers were really very much like family to me. They used to let me ride the ponies. They used to let me sit around the campfire. They cook eggs and bacon for me and so on. Jenny, one of the little local traveller girls, used to ride my bike, my push bike. We used to exchange. My parents didn't seem to miss me. I know we could say in those days kids went off and played, came home when they were hungry. Is that right? Yeah, I reckon. I think Mum enjoyed the break as well. Yeah. Strong fascination with the sea. Strongest love. Were the animals, not always my animals. There were lots of animals that lived around me, and I'd often turn up with other people's cats and dogs, which, I had to give back, and that didn't go down very well. I was always escaping from home and garden, often found myself at the ocean. You can actually read about this in my autobiography, my first book, I think it is, where a lass who lived next door to us, I think in the book she might be called Jenny, but her real name's Margaret, and she would, on one occasion anyway, she came down. They were like looking for me. I was about 3 when I was sitting on a sand dune, just watching the water go in and out. It was very exciting. And Mum had bought me a pair of those new black patent leather shoes. Have you remember those? Really shiny leather. And she told me I mustn't get these shoes dirty. So I reckoned as long as I kept my feet, which were clean, inside the shoes, I'd keep my shoes clean too. Anyway, so although they were covered in sand, the insides of them were clean. But eventually the tide came in, I was cut off. I didn't notice. I didn't take any notice at all. I was just taken up with the water. But Margaret was the one who found me and called to me, "Wendy, don't move." And I remember thinking, well, why would I want to move? I'm fine. I think if I had moved, I might have gotten to Australia a bit faster. Straight down. It was quite deep, apparently. Anyway, she waded out and put me on her shoulders, took me home. Anybody seen, what was that film called? Oh, dear. Gilbert Grape. Yeah? Oh, that's a great film, eh? Yeah, well, in Gilbert Grape, the young lad who's, I guess, playing the role of a teenager, who's about 17, 18. There's a birthday, that's right. We're not allowed to go all the way through the film now. Anyway, they tell him not to go up the water tower after they get him down. Does anybody remember that? Where is he the next day? back at the top. So was he lying when he said, no, I won't go? No, because at the time, he wasn't going. He was there, standing with them. No, I won't go up the wall. He was standing, absolutely. Do you get this? The next day is another era. He goes back to it. So he's not lying. He's living in the truth of the moment as he sees it. And Wendy was a bit like that. I used to go back to the water frequently. The people who supported me included my neighbour, that's Margaret, traveller's daughter, her horse, supportive teachers in primary school who understood my need for being on the move. So often when you've got a kid who needs to be moving, have you seen them rocking and moving about? People try to make them still. Now, how many of you doodle whilst you're on the phone? Oh, we got doodlers, yes. If you're doodling whilst you're listening to Wendy, keep doodling, because actually doodling helps you hear better. If we took your pens away, you would hear less well. So it's important to doodle. If you're a kinesthetic learner, you know, one of those people who, no, don't show me, I have to do it. Yeah? Once I do it, I get it. Are you any people like that here? Yeah, well, these kids that have to be on the move are a bit like that. Actually, they're learning better. So we need to find things that they can do instead of trying to make them still. If they do have to be still, sometimes then you need a little fold-up red bit that you carry in your pocket and you put it down. Okay, that's your spot. You sit there and you set a clock or whatever. But generally speaking, if their style of learning is I need to be on the move, then we need to find things for them to do. And these teachers would give me books to hand out, switches to turn off and on. That was one of my favourite. You're only supposed to do it at a certain time, but I never quite got that. Straightening up chairs. Oh, they gave me all sorts of things that kept me going. Okay, things that hindered me were my sensory hurts with sound, irritating clothing, and the difficulties of judging depth and distance, making it hard to interact with others, cross roads safely, or feel at home in my own body. And some of that has resolved over time, and with my Erlin lenses, other things are still very much an issue for me. Crossing a road, I still have huge problems with. It's easier to get a PhD than cross a road. It is. It is. There's so much you've got to notice. Now, academically, I know the rules for crossing a road, but it's really hard to put that into practice when, at the time, all the information that's coming at you is all the information that's coming at you. Does that make sense? Yeah. Did your dad or your mum say things like, look left, this is my left, okay, it changes because it's yours. Look left, look right, look left again. If it's all clear, walk across. Did you get told stuff like that? Oh, can you see the difficulty? What do we say to kids these days? Look and listen, keep looking and keep listening. Do we say that? Absolutely. It's very hard. It's very hard to actually know what to do to cross a road. So I haven't actually been knocked over this year, I don't think. I usually don't escape a year without getting hit. But anyway, it's one of the reasons I think that people hold on to me when we're crossing roads. If ever you notice me out with Beatrice, she's holding my shirt when we get to a crossing because she's thinking, oh no, we'll get to her before the car does. All right. Hospitalized at 10, I got really sick. I had something called osteomyelitis of my left tibia, which is a bone disease, and it put me in hospital a long time. By the time I was well enough to go home, things had changed at home. They'd moved house for a start, and my sisters had had a year without me, so they weren't too impressed when I came back. Structure and routine of hospital life suited me. Nurses became my allies, trusted me to do small jobs. People remember the old sterilizers? When you'd pack a sterilizer, you had the metal kidney bowls and the forceps and things like that, the gauze. They used to let me pack those, and I packed them with a passion. So my confidence definitely grew. Outside the hospital, back at home, sisters got a bit jealous. School life was very hard. I certainly failed academically, socially. Bullied at school, ran away from home. One of the nurses in the hospital paid me particular attention, and at 13 she became a real ally. But I came to believe that talking was getting me into deep trouble. So I stopped talking at the age of 13, gave it away for about a year. And Suzette, this particular nurse, used to come and play her guitar. This is the way we brush our teeth. Yep. Yeah, thank you. And she kind of, I don't know, just encouraged me back into speech via music and singing. So that was quite exciting. She came to a talk I did in Bristol 2 or 3 weeks ago, or whenever it was, on this tour, and it was really exciting. She'd never ever heard me talk, so for me it was very exciting. The Wendy she'd known as a child to the Wendy today. I was often in trouble with police. I remember Mother's Day. Mum loves violets, and at the flower shop they had lots of them, like whole bunches of them. Lots and lots, so I mean they wouldn't miss a few. So I scooped some flowers up and I was taking them home for Mum on Mother's Day, and this guy said, "You can't have those." Do I have them? Pardon? Yeah. So who's lying here? Eh? It's not me. I said, I can. I said. He said, "No, you can't. You haven't paid for them." And I said, "Pay? I don't have any money, silly." Shouldn't really call police people silly. Okay, even if a 9-year-old, it didn't go down terribly well. So I had a bit of a lecture. I didn't understand what they were on about, really. But that's not got to do with being deliberately difficult or stealing or any of that stuff. It's all to do with concepts. And I did not have access to the concepts at the time. Eventually, at 15, I left home, went away to college. In Taunton, in Somerset, I did a pre-nursing course, and I really did find my niche in study and in church. People were quite surprised at this seemingly, I'm dyslexic, I'm supposed to be intellectually disabled, connecting to words and that in books. It was amazing. It got better through time. Eventually, when I was much older, shouldn't talk about that yet, not there. During teenage years, I began to realise that it was me that was different. Up until then, I really thought everybody else was different. I was kind of waiting for them to become normal, which wasn't happening. And then the penny dropped. Have you heard that expression? Penny dropped, the switch clicked, or light went on, or something. They're all metaphors. It means suddenly you connect. You've had that experience? Yeah. And it was like I suddenly realised I'm just not like everybody else. And I was nearly 17 when I kind of twigged that it was me that was different. It really did form the beginnings of deep despair. My family, parents sent me off to places like guides and youth group. I think they hoped that by being around other young people of my age, I'd kind of gain access or to social skills. Have you heard of these? That somehow it would rub off on me. It didn't. I did learn all sorts of different things and won lots of badges. I got a badge for cooking. I make a great rice pudding. I remember making rice pudding for everybody in my street. And I remember thinking, because Dad said things like, "Wendy, make friends. You need to make some friends." And I tried really hard. I looked through the recipe book. And I thought, I can make my dogs sit. I can make a great rice pudding. How do you make friends? I went out and bought a book called How to Make Friends and Influence People. Not one recipe in that book. How can you call a book by such a name that it actually doesn't tell you how to make friends? So anyway, I didn't do very well. At 17, I attempted suicide. I'd attempted suicide a few times. This took me to a psychiatrist via my GP. The psychiatrist asked Mum some questions. Mum said, "Wendy lives in a world of her own. She's always talking out loud to herself, always on the go. She rocks, she flaps, etc., etc." Then the psychiatrist asked Wendy 2 questions. He said, "Wendy, do you hear voices?" You're guilty too, aren't you? Yes, I remember thinking, silly guy. Apologies if there's any psychiatrists in the room, but yes, voices were designed to be heard, and I hear voices. Then he said, "What do these voices say to you?" And I said, "Well, it depends on whose voice it is." He said, "Oh, you hear more than one." Yeah. Then he asked me if I saw things. It's better with the glasses on than off, but yes, I see things. So I was misdiagnosed, very much a misdiagnosis of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a particular kind of situation that tends to enter your life around the age of 17, 18. So I was the right age. I was seemingly saying the right kinds of things, but it wasn't the right diagnosis. We need to listen, don't we? We need to listen. That was the beginning of a very long history with the mental health system. The next 25 years of my life were in and out of mental institutions and on antipsychotic medication, something called Modica injections, a kind of chlorpromazine, Largactil. Some of you might have heard about it. It does all sorts of horrible things to you. So I couldn't go out in the sunshine or anything. In Australia, this is not very easy. So I had to cover up, wear long-sleeved everything. It was very difficult. Life in a mental institution was not encouraging or fun. I was just another mental case. Spent all day trying to find a place to sleep where I wouldn't be found. Heavily medicated. Kept me quiet. Certainly didn't help me understand the norms of social interaction. And I worry about this. I worry because people are very quick to put kids going through puberty when life's extra hard onto things like Risperdal. And it's scary because it has terrible side effects, especially if it's used long term. And psychiatrists don't always get, if you're going to use that kind of a medication, you really need to have quite a minimal amount. The therapeutic dose at one point when it first came out was something like 6 or 8 milligrams. That is actually death. That's leading to death. They changed it and lowered it down to sort of 4. 4 used to be considered a low dose. But we're saying if you're going to use something like this, 0.5 or 1 milligram. I know I'm sticking my neck out. Do you understand sticking neck out? Not doing this. It just means that I'm saying things that can be upsetting. Some kids need to be, some young adults, some older adults might need to be on such a medication. But we really need to watch that dose because it causes all sorts of horrible side effects. Yeah, it can keep me kind of constrained, but it didn't teach me anything. Things I did like about the institution were the regular meal times, the hospital structure. We always had fish on a Friday, a roast on a Sunday. We had salad with cold meat on a Saturday. You know, things were set, and you knew what to expect. It was very important. I met my husband to be at church. We met at youth group. I was 16, David was 18. We were married at 20. Somebody said to us, "You two, you're like an old married couple." And I said, "We're not married." And this person said, "Well, you should be." And I said, "Oh, all right then." This is not a good reason to get married. He did have a really lovely, matchless 500cc motorbike, which I was very attracted to. Also not a good enough reason to get married. We didn't talk very much together. Certainly spent all our time around engines, magazines about engines, lots of things. Piston engines, not rotaries. Don't do rotaries. But I lived with a lot of depression, anxiety and fear. And that life went on and on and on, even after the kids were born. After we married, we settled down in the UK. We raised a family. We emigrated to Australia in 1984. Beatrice came with us, but it took another 7 years before she could stay permanently. It took me time to settle into a very new country. I hated it. Australia wasn't like England. The baked beans didn't taste right. Cornflakes didn't taste right. Cadbury's chocolate didn't taste like Cadbury's. People used to get a bit upset with me when I complained about these sorts of things. It took ages, and my body swelled up and I got real sick. I came home after about a year, came back to the UK to spend time here dealing with some of the things that I was going through. It's hard to explain all this, but eventually I certainly settled. Dave was often unemployed. which was very hard for a young family, and that depression and anxiety continued. Tim, my youngest, received his diagnosis of autism, Asperger's, at the time when he was about 12. He wasn't too impressed. I remember him telling me, he thought, Mummy said, you think everybody's got autism, which isn't true, because you don't, do you? Say no? No, it's not true, but it was his way of coping. He didn't really cope until he was about 18, and I was getting my first book published, and we had a book launch, and Tim stood next to me, and he said to the people, had his arms kind of like this, I have autism too. I have Asperger type autism, and if you'd like me to sign your book, I'm quite happy. And he's stood up and shared bits and pieces about his experience as somebody growing up with autistic parents. Okay, this label opened new doors. With it came hope, more challenges. I'm convinced my oldest son, Guy, who's more classically autistic in lots of ways. He doesn't have a diagnosis. He's nearly 40 now. He can play any instrument just by listening to it, and music is his absolute passion. He's doing okay, so he probably doesn't need a diagnosis in lots of ways, but I do think it might help his women friends understand him better. You know, every time one of them wants to get married or settle down, it's like, well, Guy is like, why? He doesn't really get it, and they usually leave. Anyway, with the help of friends from church and neighbours near where I lived, I eventually settled down. Life centred around my children and making ends meet. Another picture, this is at Melbourne Show. We have in September every year, we have a big show where all the cattle and sheep and everything come together. It's like a farm show. Do you have that kind of thing? And you can watch them making butter, and you can relate to the little animals. And anyway, show days, everything closes in Melbourne for show day. Everybody gets a day off. It's that important. The kids didn't think so, but it was. The in-between bits. Family life for us is full of ups and downs and around the corner times. Life's a journey, one that has the welcome and unexpected events. For me, misdiagnosis, moving countries, discovering sexuality, coping with misunderstanding, divorce, diagnosis, death of my middle son, Maddie, gaining an education, ill health, discovering my vocation, have all been part of that journey. And probably a lot of you had similar things, eh? Isn't life full of all sorts of things? Yeah. Do you start out discovering and learning and discovering again as you're going through life? Absolutely. This is everybody's sort of journey, really. Routine, ritual, and familiarity have been good friends. This might be where we differ, because probably if we took your diaries away, you wouldn't be impressed. People need diaries. People like to know what's happening on Monday, what you've got booked. Yeah, so you do like familiarity. Everybody has a certain side of the bed they sleep on. Yep, particular TV programs you watch. That staff room mug is mine. Don't touch. So people do like things to be familiar, but at the same time you probably cope a little bit better with change than I do. When I'm travelling and I'm on the road, and I am on the road a lot, I have to trust others to know my needs. I have to let them know what works for me. They take charge of arrangements and so on. I pass my need for structure over to them. The routine is in letting them do it. At home I eat from a favourite plate, drink from a favourite mug, sit in my chair, operate from my routine. On the road, the routine is they do it and I do what I'm told. It will be too hard to try to just always keep the things the way that I need. If that was the rule, it would be very difficult. But just a quick breakdown of conversations that typical people get involved in. This is the way your brains are wired up, so it's very much part of how you think. Small talk. Who does small talk? The opposite to big talk, you know what I mean? Just talk that we just say, how are you, when people don't even really want to know. Have you come across this? I won't go into why you do this. It's very strange, but this is what you do. Gossip, metaphor, dishonesty, body language, joking, teasing, masking multi-interests, multitask, multi-meaning. And this is the way you guys live. This is the way you're designed, and it works for you. You don't even have to finish a sentence. A lady at a conference, I don't know, recently, said to me, she'd heard me years ago, and we talked about how typical people often don't even finish a sentence. I'm just going out. Do you say that kind of thing? Yeah? How many of you say, I'm just coming in? I mean, you might have to knock on the door and say, I'm just coming in. Might be really important. But do we say that as often? No. You don't need to, really. And a lot of the reasons you don't finish sentences is because there don't need to be more said, because people have that meaning, tucked in. They know what it means. Anyway, I said to this lady that quite often typical people don't finish sentences, and she was working with a very, I don't like the expression, but people talk about non-verbal. This lady who didn't have any language, and every time she went over to pick this woman up, and I don't mean physically pick her up, but she said to her things like, we're going to go out, get your coat, got some, love that place that you love to go to, we're going to go. And this woman would scream and throw herself on the floor and refuse to go. So one day she said to her, we're going to go out and we're coming back. And that was it. She got her coat. That's all it took. That's all it took. We think differently. We don't do small talk. We do a lot of straight talk. No interest in gossip. Mean what we say what we mean. Might not use body language. For us, no interest equals no attention. I'll talk a lot more about this in this afternoon's talk. Being accepted for who I am is the very best thing and sends me a message that I am valued. People change if they feel valued. Don't you feel better about who you are if you feel valued? Yeah. Doesn't it kind of release you to talk and be yourself if you feel valued? Absolutely. And it's the same for us. Part of that acceptance is understanding that I have interests that take over my attention. Using those interests constructively keeps me motivated and gives me a starting place to learn, to share, to learn how to share with others in our everyday lives. So as a way of summary, it's really important to listen. It's really important to be aware of what you're bringing with you, the sort of baggage, assumptions, expectations, understanding, etc. What messages am I getting? What messages are you giving? What messages are you getting? Respect for achievement. We had a young man who used to spit every time. He really loved spitting, and it was a case of, wow, Stephen, you spat 5 times less than you did 5 minutes ago, mate. That's great. And we kind of took him down bit by bit until he was at a point where he wasn't spitting anymore. Rather than, that's disgusting, Stephen. Stop that immediately. He would have loved that. He would have made sure he kept it up, okay? He kept spitting. But when we changed it around, it was very helpful. Reducing sensory overload, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon. Using my interest to set achievable goals. If they're not achievable, please don't set them. Maintaining understanding of each other's worlds through mutual respect. I want to read you this poem. It's one of my favourite. I've forgotten to tell people that I have copies of a DVD that's specially on understanding autism and sensory stuff, and I've got them just up here, but I forgot to mention that. The future. Life on earth is but a moment caught within the crease of time. The seasons come and go again. You have your life and I have mine. The seed that's planted within the ground cannot choose what to become. A potato, an apple or a rose for some. However, for it to be the very best, it needs rich soil, not poor. The sun and the rains must come to open that seed's door. I may be born to nourish others. I may delight the senses. I may grow tall, I may grow small, I may stay stunted beneath wire fences. My future, all of our futures, may not depend on our stock so much as it does upon sources of warmth, sources of care. I depend on the nurture to be for me there. Then I can blossom, sing with the birds. Then I can grow my potential whatever that potential is, and it's different for each of us. So plant me in goodness, and all that is fine, please, please keep the intruders away. Give me a chance to develop in time to become who I am in life's future one day. And you've got these resources and some references. I just wanted to show you a few minutes of this video. In the video, kids who are non-verbal, there's that term again, who aren't speaking and have been considered, they're never going to be very much or amount to very much and so on, are communicating. They were able only to attend for 6 seconds. Within a month and a half, they'd moved that to 40 seconds. That's massive. In the video, you'll also see briefly a picture of Temple Grandin's, a part of Temple's brain. They don't say it's Temple's, but I know it is, because I'm involved in some of the research and we haven't got time to go there. So I'm going to play you a little bit of this, and then we'll have a few minutes questions. I'm not going to play you the whole thing because we haven't got time. But you can look it up on YouTube.
And for the very first time, we can actually see what autism looks like. On the left is someone with autism. On the right, someone without. Look at that. Wow. It has a whole lot more of these fibres and cables going on. Right. These particular fibres make it possible to see something and then say what it is. But in this brain of a woman with autism, that connection between seeing and saying is a jumbled, wiry mess. The message gets lost in the tangle. Do you know where all of these extra fibres in her brain are going?
We do know where they're going in the sense of which piece of the brain. We don't yet know enough about the brain to actually know what each of those pieces are.
What you're seeing there is a brain where everything is kind of running smoothly together and talking to itself nicely. A bit boring, really. Stop it. That's what you're seeing in typical development. But in autism, did you see how the disparity, how everything is going off in different angles, and the distance between some of those fibres? No wonder information gets lost for us. No wonder concepts and building concepts to help us understand is hard. No wonder it's very difficult to skip from one interest to another. So we're going to be passionate, obsessed. We're going to be people that are single-minded. We're going to be literal. We're going to be black and white, etc. And if you get this, if you understand what's happening, and I will talk more about this afternoon, it'll help you when you're working with us, when you're loving us and relating to us. It makes a huge difference. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.